Hi everyone, and welcome to Reedsy Live, our series of webinars where we bring on publishing experts to show you how to write and publish better books. My name is Felicia, and I'm covering for Mark today. Some of you might recognize me from some of the writing events and masterclasses that we host. So yeah, while we can wait for everyone to tune in, feel free to say hello in the chat and tell us where you're from. And yeah, I thought I'd also take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about some of the events that we have coming up. If you're a children's book author, some of these may or may not be relevant to you. The next week we're hosting a masterclass on how to write a book that scales your business and brand. So this is more for non-fiction writers. And the week after that, on December 15th, we have a masterclass on character building, specifically interiority with Michael. He's an editorial book coach who focuses on fiction, memoir, and children's books. You can find out more about these over at reedsy.com/learning/events. But we are just a minute after 8 p.m. here in London, so it's time to go get started, and I'll see you in just a second. Hi everyone, and welcome to Reedsy Live, our series of webinars where we bring on publishing experts to show you how to write and publish better books. My name is Felicia from Reedsy, and I'm covering for Martin today. And we have a great session in store for you today, all about the basic building blocks of writing a picture book. My guest today is Frances Gilbert. She's an editorial director at Random House Children's Books, and she's worked in children's publishing for over 30 years. She's also the author of 10 picture books and works as a children's book editor here at Reedsy. Frances, welcome. How are you today?
Hello. Felicia, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. I could not really hear you very well, and I'm just wanting to make sure that you can hear me fine.
Yes, I can hear you fine. I apologize if other people tuning in are also struggling a little bit with hearing me. I'll try and figure that out in just a second. Frances is perfect. I'm just reading some of the comments here. Okay, hopefully some people can hear me, some people are struggling a little bit. There is a little bit of a lag perhaps, but yeah, maybe I won't say too much before we get started. I will just hand it straight over to you, Frances. I know that you've got a great session on children's books coming up, so yeah, if you want to bring up your screen, we can get started. There will be a Q&A at the end. I'll post that in the comments as well if people are struggling to hear me. But yeah, over to you. I'll be in the background if you need anything.
Great. Thank you so much, Felicia. And certainly if my sound starts to get garbled, please pop up and tell me. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello from Brooklyn, New York. I'm Frances Gilbert. I'm an editorial director at Random House Children's Books. And since June, I've been an editor at Reedsy, which has been so much fun. I focus on picture books. And I've really enjoyed the last few months of meeting and learning about their goals and their path to writing and reading their stories. And the reason I suggested this topic for a webinar is that one thing that became clear over the last few months is that most of the writers I work with, really almost all of them, need a lot of guidance in the basics of picture book writing. And that's totally fine. You know, you can't be an expert at something as soon as you start doing it. And picture books are sort of a deceptively difficult genre. They're short and they're often fun, so they feel like they should be really easy, but they're really not. So I wanted to give this seminar on absolute basics of picture book writing if you're just starting out, so that you have a solid foundation as you go forward with your writing. So many of the stories I get are too long, too dense, too mature, too slow, just really not a picture book. It's kind of a technical type of writing. That's not to say it's not also creative, but it is quite technical. And I want you to be able to make the most of your time when you're working with me. And this is why I think this seminar can be really helpful for both of us, because if you've hired me to work on your picture book, I'd like you to be able to first get it to a place where your time with me will be more meaningful. So I'm going to start sharing my slides here, and I'm just going to basically be going through some basics of kind of picture book foundations. And here is our slide, and somebody will pop up and yell at me if this isn't working. Now, I'm hearing somebody's sound. Is somebody who maybe doesn't have their mic muted? If everybody could just check. So I'm going to start with the first. There are many different types of picture books, and I've very, very broadly categorized them into 4 different types of books. The first one we're going to talk about is plot-driven picture books. So this is basically exactly what it says. There's a plot. This is a once upon a time kind of story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a character that has an arc. There's a crescendo to the character's path, and there's a resolution. This is a tale as old as time. So we see here on this slide, we have classics such as Madeline and the Polar Express. And then we also have more contemporary modern classics such as The Day the Crayons Quit. So this is a, very straightforward story is what you're telling here. Type of picture book, character driven. Again, as it suggests, this kind of story writing is really all about the character. Grumpy Monkey, which is a recent hit that's come out of my colleagues at Penguin Random House. The Smart Cookie by Jory John, which started with one book and then turned into a larger series called The Food Group, where each book has a different food character that's the star of the book. And going back about a decade, Pinkalicious, which was published by HarperCollins, which was a really sort of magnificent, successful, character-driven picture book. And these books instantly go on to have sequels and board books and easy readers and merchant, and it's very much about selling this character. That's not to say, of course, they also have narrative stories, but the character is really kind of the hero. Thirdly, we have concept-driven books. Now, this is something that you might consider sort of high concept. So it's not really a story, as in here's a character who's going to go through this process, this narrative. It's more you're selling an idea. So many of you will have seen this series, How to Catch Santa Claus, How to Catch a Ghost, How to Catch a Leprechaun. This is a very, very, very popular, hugely best-selling, seasonal-driven program, and it's exactly what you see on the cover. It's meant to be merchandised at seasonal opportunities, and each book is roughly similar but with a different character. In the middle, I Love You to the Moon and Back is a concept-driven sort of parent and child I love you book. There are many books like this on the market. Some of them, like this one in the center, have been extremely successful. So it's more of a poetic ode to family unity and family love. It's not a story, it's an idea. And then again, going back to one of the great classics, Goodnight Moon, this is also concept driven. This is about a little bunny that goes to bed, but it's not really, there's no real plot. It's more of a poem about the gentleness of going to sleep. And lastly, nonfiction. Here we have Peek Through Picture Book, which was actually a book that I published on Doubleday. This is a very light narrative nonfiction about the phases of the moon and the animals that live in the forest. In the center, we have an historical nonfiction story about a fireboat that was engaged on 9/11. And then we have an example of a picture book biography, Snowflake Bentley, which was a Caldecott medal winner from about 25 years ago, about a man who photographs snowflakes. So I share these with you just because it's good to know the genre you're working in. I would really encourage you to spend time in the library, spend time looking at the books that the young people in your life have at home on their shelves. Go to the bookstore, really get a sense of where your book lives in the marketplace. I'm just going to stop sharing a slide for a moment. So now I want to talk about the ages of picture books. I often get requests for to edit a picture book, and when the writer describes their picture book text, they'll say, this is for children ages 2 to 12, or this is for kids ages 8 to 10. And that's when I know that this writer is going to need a little help sort of honing their story, because picture books are not for that wider range of kids, and they're not for that old an age of kids. Broadly speaking, picture books are for kids ages 3 to 7. And within the ages of 3 to 7, these are wildly different years for children. What a 3-year-old likes to read is not what a 7-year-old likes to read. But generally speaking, try to keep it within 3 to 7. Your books will skew a little younger, some will skew a little older, but they will not, generally speaking, go higher than age 7. Before age 3, obviously, this is babies and toddlers. They're really reading board books and just really learning early concepts. At age 3, children are more able to take in an entire story. There are some exceptions, but this is always a good place to start. Another basic is that picture books are 32 pages long. Now, I could get into all kinds of details here, which you don't want to hear, about printing presses and how they work, and signature and end papers. Suffice to say, keep this in mind. Think about 12 scenes or 12 beats. Within a 32-page picture book, if you take out all the front matter, all the back matter, that's title pages, end papers, copyright pages, there are 24 pages. I know it sounds a bit confusing. A 32-page book is actually 24 pages of story. So think of it either as 24 pages or as 2-page spreads or 12 beats. You don't have to get really into the weeds over this, but it's really helpful to know your plotting so that you can keep the pace in mind, so that you're not writing a story that is just far too long and there are too many scenes and you couldn't possibly fit it, or you're not writing a story that is just too short. Sometimes when I'm working on a text, I start paginating it and I realize, oh, you've only got half a book here. You really need to start, start lengthening this. So those are some details to keep in mind. I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay. And we're going to get to my next, which is manuscript length. And I hope you can all see this, screenshot here about the classic picture book, Miss Rumphius. So picture books tend to be short. They're under 1,000 words. They're often well under 1,000 words. And they're as short as they've ever been, because none of us, children or grown-ups, have attention spans anymore. So the first example I want to share with you is Miss Rumphius. It's a classic children's picture book from, I believe, the early 1980s. This is the first page of that book. And as you can see, it's a rather dense 2 paragraphs about a lady who lives by the sea. It describes her house. It also describes what she was like as a little girl. There's quite a bit of information on this first scene. This is very typical of the kind of picture book writing that would have been popular in the 1940s through maybe the 1980s. But then over the years, recently, they've started to get shorter and shorter. Picture books aren't usually written in long paragraphs like this. I mean, this is a wonderful and beloved story, but it is not the kind of picture book that people tend to be acquiring today in terms of editors and agents. Picture books are usually written in sort of short, simple, staccato phrases. They're bouncy, they're breezy, they're lyrical in rhythm. It's not a large block of text. One of the things to always think about in picture books is that every word counts. And I always tell people to think of your picture book like a poem. So don't just sort of dash off many, many, many sentences and paragraphs without going back and asking yourself about each word and each sentence and is this the best way I can phrase this? Do I need all of this text? And yeah, so just keep in mind that there are so few words that you have to be so precise. Now, my next slide, and this is a little bit self-involved because this is a picture book that I wrote and which was just published in October. It's called I'm Dreaming of a Pink Christmas. So in contrast to Miss Rumphius, on the first page of this, I wrote, December only here, I'm making a list, I'm checking it twice, and I'm dreaming of. So this first scene has 16 words. Again, Miss Rumphius had 100. And the next page is I'm dreaming of a pink Christmas. So we have 3 words. So all told, over 2 scenes, there are 19 words. compared to 100 words for Miss Rumphius. I would say that you don't necessarily have to write as spare as I have in this particular picture book, but this style of writing is much more in line with the kind of picture books that are being acquired today. They're shorter, they're breezier, don't tend to have large blocks of text. Now, related to length, I want to also explain that you're not writing a short story. A picture book is a physical object. Your story, if it's acquired, if you hire an illustrator to create the art and self-publish, your story will be complemented by illustrations. So you should be writing keeping that in mind. You don't have to explain everything. So here's an example. So actually, you're the first to see this. This book isn't coming out until next summer, and this is a book I'm at Random House. This is a scene from Farm Shark, an extremely funny book by Bill Canterbury with illustrations by Maddie Frost. So prior to this scene, Farm Shark has arrived at the farm for reasons that are never explained. And the first thing he does is he chomps a sheep. So this is gone at this point. And Bill Canterbury, the author, writes, "The chickens picked a bad time to visit." You can see instantly from the art why it's a bad time. The chickens walk in, they're a little bit close. Farm Shark looks very eager to eat another animal, and the remaining three animals are sort of looking at them with wide eyes saying, "Stay away." But what I want you to note here is the succinctness of this. The chickens picked a bad time to visit. That's, what is that, 7, 8 words. And that's all Bill needed to say to convey this very funny scene. So when I see a scene like this written by someone who has not had that kind of experience with picture books, that seems something like, then the chickens arrived and they saw the farm shark, and then they asked pig this, and they asked goat that, and they asked cow this, and they said, there seems like a weird vibe here. So you see how that's not good storytelling. That's just an exposition. That's just telling me what's happening. What you would do in your picture book is sort of tee up the art so that they're working in harmony, or in some cases, sort of in opposition with each other. And I'm just the next page after this. So it says the chickens picked a bad time to visit. There's a bit of chit chat from the chickens. The last one says there's a weird vibe here. And the next one is the vibe got weirder. And then you have the chickens in the stomach, and they're complaining. And there's sheep who was recently gobbled. And he says, "Hi, chickens, welcome to Farm Shark's stomach." So again, in terms of the narration, there's only 4 words here. The vibe got weirder. So again, in a lesser hand, this story might have said, and then the farm shark chomped the chickens, and the chickens were in the stomach, and they saw sheep, and sheep said this. But rather than that, this author knew to trust that the illustrator was going to bring a lot of humor to this, a lot of understanding, and ultimately it's better storytelling. Now, moving to our next example. With picture book writing, there's a musicality to the writing. It's not, as I said earlier, sort of dense, long expository paragraphs. There's a lyrical quality. Sometimes there's a funny quality, and picture books, can be sort of serious and poetic as well. And here's an example. This is also a book that no one has seen yet, because this actually isn't going to be published for over a year. This is another picture book I'm working on at Random House called If You Meet a Fairy by Julie Schroeder, who's actually a debut writer, and illustrated by Dagmar Smith. And when I acquired this, the reason I absolutely fell in love with this story was the way that Julie immediately immerses you as the reader into her story. And I'll just read it for you. "If you happen to be picking dandelions one day and you see a mysterious hole in a tree, not to say, 'I wish I was little enough to climb in there,' because if those dandelions happen to be magic and the dandelion fluff makes your nose tickly," and I'm going to go to the next page now, "achoo, poof, you might end up as small as a mouse." So you can see gorgeous writing that she addresses the reader as you, if you happen to be picking dandelions. And she talks about meeting a fairy as if it's the most casual thing in the world. Like, a child reading this can imagine that they could just go into their backyard and get a hole in the tree. There's probably fairies there. it was the immersiveness of it that I loved, and the wonderful way in which she's immediately speaking to the reader, and as a reader, you are all in from the first page. And to the musicality of picture book writing, wrong way. And as I mentioned earlier, picture books are a physical object. They have art and they have text intertwined. But there's also a page turn. So it's the musicality of writing. A page turn is a way to get more out of the pacing of your book. If your book is funnier, you can use a page turn joke really land. Think of it like a punchline. If your book is emotional, you can use a page turn to heighten that emotion on the next page. So here's an example of a book I published this fall. Very, very funny book, also by a writer. This is called Squash and Pumpkin by Gigi McQueen, and the art was done by Michael Slack. And this is the first page. Pumpkin and I are best friends. We're in all winter, spring, and summer. And then in the fall, everything changes because, page turn, Pumpkin, the star of autumn. And then in this scene, Squash goes on to say why Pumpkin is all, kind of fancy. Pumpkin is kind of everything in autumn. And you can see at the end, Squash is getting a little bit sort of fed up with the fact that she gets overlooked. This page turn allows us to set things up and then turn them and we get a whole new scene. So keep that in mind when you're writing. How can I use a page turn to really dramatically heighten or lengthen, I want to say? Use it to great effect. And I also just want to go back to such a wonderfully funny writer. You can see again the way that this writer allows the illustrations to tell a lot of the story. So she says we're inseparable all winter, spring, and summer. Those lines in particular aren't super interesting telling as winter, spring, and summer. But she knew that Michael Slack would then be able to create these wonderfully adorable and funny and sweet illustrations of making snow angels running through the field and surfing. And again, in kind of a hand of an author who maybe isn't as skilled at this genre, this page might have said, we're inseparable all when we love to make snow angels. And then in the spring, we love to run through the fields and collect flowers. And then in the summer, we go surfing. That's not good storytelling. It's too much. It's sort of telling me more than I need to know. The joy in this is allowing my ear to hear a little bit of the story and allowing my eyes to fill in the rest of it. And again, as an adult, that's a really satisfying experience. You're not being told everything. Children are told things all day. A picture book allows them to create their own connections on the page, and that is a really important, satisfying reading experience. Now, another thing to keep in mind as you're writing your picture books is you have to open strong. So remember that your audience is likely 3, 4, 6, 7 years old, and they're really antsy. They have a lot of other things competing for their attention. Your audience could also be a parent standing in a bookstore thumbing through a page and wondering if she wants to buy this book. You have to get them right away. A lot of the comments I give on Reedsy edits is that the opener is too slow. I read a lot of stories that start with something like, hi, my name is Josie and my brother's name is Henry and we live on Pine Street and my dog, et cetera, et cetera. And instantly I'm out. I always say I feel like I'm quite lucky because I have the attention span of a 4-year-old. So when I read that, I feel like it's already too much. You really want your reader to be gripped. The example I'm sharing here, also another sneak peek that no one has seen yet, is Pizzasaurus, which comes out in, I believe in February of this coming year, by Tammy Sauer, who is a legendary, wonderful, funny picture book writer. And I actually had the pleasure of publishing her very first book 20 years ago, which I pulled out of the slush pile. And she's gone on to have an extraordinary career. And art by Kyle Beckett, who is a new-ish and up-and-coming, very talented illustrator. So the first line of this book of Pizza, you know somebody about yours, of course, Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops has him. Now, when Tammy first sent in this manuscript, the first line was actually what we see here is the second line. It started a chord of Tyrannosaurus Rex, Stegosaurus, and Triceratops. We were working on the edits together. I started to think that that kind of felt like we were starting in the middle of a conversation, and I felt like I needed a beat to come before that. It back to Tammy, and because she's such a great writer and a terrific reviser, she came back. You look like someone who knows a lot about dinosaurs. Now imagine the experience of being a 4-year-old who loves dinosaurs, who's obsessed. Open a story, and the author herself, the narrator, is saying, "You look like someone who knows a lot about dinosaurs." You're instantly in because you've been recognized. The author, the narrator, has said, "Hey, I see you. I know a thing about you." It's a really magical experience, and your reader is and they're going to want to be turning the pages, and they're going to want to meet Pizzasaurus who's coming. So really make sure that when you're writing that you're starting slowly and strong, and that you just grab me from the very page. Now, another thing I see every Reedsy text that I edit is far too much dialogue, and dialogue that feels very sort of chit-chatty and frankly meaningless. There's a lot of dialogue that happens around sort of domestic situations. So maybe you have a story about a child's messy room, but the dialogue went back and forth about the mother saying, "Pick up your socks," and the kids say, I don't feel like it," and then back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and there's huge passages of dialogue. It really slows the story down quite dramatically. And it's honestly just not very interesting. Dialogue needs to be used very clearly and in a very interesting manner, not just forward the story along by saying family's having an argument, so I'm going to give you, Ev's entire argument. It's just not pleasing. It's not fun reading. So here's an example of a book I published a couple of years ago by Charnel Pinckney Barlow, who's an author illustrator. This is called Little Rosetta and the Guitar, and it's a picture book biography of pioneering musician Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And it starts every week. The people of Cotton Plant, Arkansas, join together to sing and shout, "Music is the heart of our story," Mama boasted. And that's the line of dialogue on that page. You get a little bit of information from Mama about what music means to her and her community. If we turn the page, one day Mama surprised her with a special gift. "Now you can make your very own story." So there's a really lovely callback to this line. Music is the heart of our story. And then the next page, "Now you can make your very own story." So if this dialogue had not been quite so successful, it could have been a very long back and forth conversation about the mother saying, "I want you to take guitar lessons," and the little girl saying, "I don't feel like guitar lessons," and on and on and on. And already I'd be sort of out, Charnel is such a succinct and thoughtful writer, and she logging away just to sort of punctuate and add a personal and emote, and then she moves on and lets the narrator take the rest. I'm going to say I can probably talk for about 2 or 3 hours about this next particular topic, so I'll try and keep it succinct. One thing I really want to stress as you are working on your picture books is that writing is really hard. It's so hard. Well, and yet I would say about 80% of the manuscripts I get rhyme. And all of those manuscripts need a fair bit of editing, which again, it's why I'm here. I've written rhyming picture books. I did countless rhyming picture books. Love rhyming picture books, but they're very, very difficult. One of the things that happens is that people make peculiar and forced word choices simply because it had to rhyme. So you've got this line that ends in a certain word. You have to make the next line rhyme with that. And the second line is just not successful, because if you're in prose, it would be a very strange thing to say. So the thing to always imagine is what would the line feel like if it didn't have to rhyme? And your rhyming has that natural. I can't get to the end of a line and think it's a weird word choice, but at least it rhymes. It's not enough for it to rhyme. It also has to, it has to feel like something that person would say. Rhyming texts often come into me with random rhythm as well, and random rhymes. So it's okay to switch up your rhythm and your rhyme scheme if you do it deliberately. Think about somebody like Lin-Manuel Miranda and the wonderful songs he writes for shows such as Hamilton. listen to one of his songs, it just things up all the time. Very specifically done. He'll throw in this, or he'll switch to a different rhyme scheme to try to change things up. But what I see mostly is people who just kind of what the rhyme scheme was, or they have a very particular rhythm and there's a number of beats and stresses for each line. Suddenly one line just doesn't have that. And as a read aloud experience, it's very jarring. So make sure you think a lot about the rhythm as well. The other issue with rhyming is there's kind of an overwhelming sameness to it all, sort of a predictability. And that is where I'll bring up Lin-Manuel Miranda. You could never have it being either bland or predictable. If you have a 32-page book full of tight rhyming bits, by the end of those pages, I'm probably going to be steam. So you might want to think about ways in which you can maybe insert a chorus or a bit of a refrain or something in a slightly meter or slightly different rhymes, different vibe, kind of breaks things up a bit. Reading rhyming couplet after couplet can be. The screen I have is for a book that I published years ago at Random House called Duck Taco Truck. Tell from title alone what a fun rhyme this is going to be. It was written by Laura Lavoie, and it was illustrated by Teresa. And I'm just going to to you so you can hear the wonderful rhyme that attracted me to acquire this book. Duck taco truck, working hard, buck. Hungry swimmers at the beach, tasty tacos within reach. Splish splash, counting cash, added to the stash. Duck saving for a boat, for need to swim and float. So this first page sets up what the issue is, that there's a boat. We know that they have a truck. We know that there are two ducks. And we know that they're saving up their money. I love the internal rhyme of splish, splash, cash, the way that splash rhymes with cash. Right? It's funny. None of it is forced. Feels like it sort of propels me. I want to turn the page now and see what's going to happen next. So by keep working in rhyme if that is really speaking to you. But just know that you're going to have to be extra to make sure it feels unique, fresh, and buoyant. And the last detail I'm going to add that you don't need to apply illustrations. Question a lot. If you are going to be sent to an agent or an editor, unless you are a working illustrator, working in picture books, and I don't mean, your neighbor who's not an artist. If you're a professional illustrator, you could supply illustrations, but it's fair. For the part, if you're a writer and you're to agents and submit your text. It's our job to be an illustrator. Obviously, if you're publishing, you will need an illustrator. That's a whole different thing. But I do run across many people who intend to submit to agents, and they will say, can we find an illustrator? And I don't want you to go down that path. It will be a waste of money because the publisher is going to want to find their own editor for your story. And now I've raced through this a little. I think it gives us a bit more time for questions. I just want to this last slide just to remind you that I am editor Reedsy, specializing in pics, and I'm available here. I've pretty much built up through the end of December, but I'm starting to my new Dreaming of Christmas is it's very sweet colors. And also follow me on Instagram at picturebookreps, where I post about children's books. So I'm going to sharing now, and we will hand it over to Felicia.
Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I've seen from the chat that we're experiencing a little bit of glitch in terms of the sound. But hopefully you are still following along, and as I mentioned, the replay will be available, so you can catch up on that afterwards. But yeah, we have some great questions coming in. I thought I would start by bringing a few of those up on the screen, and we'll see how many we can get through. I see quite a few people asking questions about illustrations. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about just the process of where does the illustrator come in? How does it work? A lot of people are asking about the process of submitting a book proposal and how the text and the illustrations work for that.
Yeah, well, yeah, as I just said, you don't have to supply illustrations. That would not be advisable. So you're applying your manuscript, which will be likely 1,000 words long. Sorry, I'm just getting a lot of feedback. Is there a mic on?
I don't think there is a mic on. I can try and mute myself while you're talking, and we'll see if that works.
Okay, that's better. You don't need to supply illustrations. You should not supply illustrations. So you will submit your manuscript, which will under 1,000 words, no doubt, and a query letter. I'm also available on Reedsy to query letter for you. I usually don't bother people's query letters because they are often a little bit out of line with what is did professionally. It's a very specific letter. So if you want me to write you a query letter, I will just write a letter for you. A query letter is a succinct explanation of your book and who you are and where that book fits in the marketplace. And that's submit.
Perfect. Let's see if we can get another question up here. Let's see. Diane is asking if you could explain the difference between a picture book and a book for a young reader.
Oh yeah, well, I don't know what you mean by young reader, but I suspect maybe you mean a leveled reader or an easy. Actually, my bookshelf. I have one. Grab one. A leveled reader. This is one that I actually wrote. This is a program house called Step Into Reading. I've written these, including this one. I love cake. If this is what you're talking about, levels are a very pedagogical kind of publishing, and they're specifically designed to let a child learn how to read with a amount of independence. And you start with level 1, and our program goes to level 4. It's very incredibly simple text. It have complicated sentence structure. It has limited vocabulary. It uses a lot of repetition, and all of the words, if you understand them, can be decoded by pictures. So if you didn't know the word, you could understand that this is a scene. And if you didn't know the word cake, you could she's baking a cake. So I hope that answers your question. That is the difference between a picture book, a leveled reader. The step leveled readers is a book, and that's more of a small, sometimes novel, the kind of books that children start reading ages of 7 and 8.
Well, we have a similar question, but I've lost it on the screen. But someone was asking about the difference between, or if you have a picture book without words. I'm guessing that is more for even younger readers. But if you could maybe speak to that a little bit as well.
I'm not sure if I 100% heard you, but you're talking about picture book words.
Yes. So if you have a picture book without any words, what are the ages that you'd aim that at?
Well, wordless pictures are a little bit controversial, not hugely popular in the industry, and here's why. I just don't love them. Felicia, I'm hearing your feedback again. Thank you. Parents of wordless picture books, then the storytelling is on and if a parent is very busy and tired at night and a child points to the wordless picture book, it means the parent's going to have to do a little bit of work. That gets passed along to others. The book's back gets passed along to sales work for publishing houses. And that feedback back gets on to us editors, where when we acquire a picture book that has no word, the sales often say, well, that's going to be a challenge. So we are wary of them. At the same time, there are magnificent wordless picture books. I will say that picture books tend to be driven obviously by the art. So if you are a reader and you send a manuscript that is wordless, where you're just giving a lot of directions, I will say, Frank, you would have a lot of trouble getting that acquired. I would say that you're an illustrator, a professional illustrator creating a picture book, then, by all means, that you're the driver. But simply directions for somebody else to create a wordless book probably would not result in success. However, if you're creating your own publishing, you've got someone you love with, then obviously expand.
All right, I'll briefly take myself off mute. We've got another one here asking about some of the trends. I'm curious how picture books need to be different now than 10, 20, 30 years ago, as kids are exposed to so much more now. How would you incorporate that knowledge into your writing?
I think one of the main ways is what discussed earlier is that they're just so much now. I will, and again, also distract have so many other forms of media for our attention. I would say picture books tend to be a little bit more sort of commercial minded. So as publishers, always trying to think, does this go in the store and how merchandise and how do we market? So a very sort of sweet, sort of alone narrative might have sold extremely in the 1970s, harder time coming to market now. So much of the market is by books like How to Catch Sand, you know, they're very sort of sparkly and grabby. One of the big deals also is that we most of our books online now. So that are very high concept, like How to Catch Sand, those are the kind of search terms that a book on a site such as Amazon really start to rise up because people are on and searching for literally the books. Whereas, you know, your very beautiful book story about, you know, a turtle on a walkout might have that same advantage because there aren't going to be people on Amazon searching for, say, quiet turtle. That's just the reality of the sort of like, you know, intense world we're living. And in terms of how much incorporate, I think children are still children. If you're talking about incorporating, you know, very dark issues that the globe is facing, you know, I tend to recommend this. At the same time, there are some books that very deliberately take on, you know, issues such as horror, and they will do that still in a very that's very mindful of the age child who will be reading it. That's you have to avoid those. It's just you always want to for that it needs told in a way that a young child can appreciate, you know, not be overwhelmed by.
Perfect. I think there's a little bit of a lag, but hopefully you're still following along. We have a question here from Mary Ann who asks, in a market that often favors high concept humorous books, is there still a place for quieter, more lyrical picture books?
For certain, it really depends. If you're, again, I'm from the point of view of a publisher, right? I work for Penguin House, but within Penguin Random has many different imprints and an imprint of a subset of house. So I work for Random House books, but within Random House books are all these different imprints, all have their own sort of vibe, their own editorial mission, and their own taste. And there are imprint editors who really love quiet lyrical picture books, and they also might have a connection to maybe the schooling market, where books especially appreciate might have a real connection to the book market, where a book will be very thoughtfully sold. A quieter picture book might not end up in, you know, because it is, you know, a very limited space and to be did by sort of proof sellers and character driven and, you know, more high concept you're referring to. But yeah, I've published many lyrical picture books that I've really working on. At the time, I've also published commercial, funny blockbusters.
Cool. And then we have a question here from Becca. How do authors keep the writing succinct when writing a non-fiction picture book? Does the topic have to be super narrow, or is the information very surface level?
Really good question. I don't work in nonfiction, but do. Here's the trick. I always keep the after mind, the back matter. So nonfiction picture books will have 2 pages designated at the end of the book where you can get into issues about your story that expands things. Example, I published a really wonderful nonfiction picture book 5 years ago called Bone White House by Candace. And it was about Tom Person and how the extraordinary detail, which is how amateur paleontologist and a very important, and when he was president, built the White House with historic bones, and he set expeditions to get bones, including Lewis and Candace Ransom wrote extraordinarily beautiful, very poetic story about this quest, what this to a growing nation, just the getting bigger and the being upset with the idea of America on the map globally, and how he was do that by focusing on big prehistoric animals. But many times, and Candace and I were working on, we would get into issues of paleontology and where geographically, or you know, what was as we were expanding, what was on with Indigenous Americans as this expansion winning. There was no room in her lyrics to get into dark issues of genocide, but we were not going to mention it. So we did a very dense afterward where Candace wrote like little mini essays, sort of cobbled them all together in like work about various themes, including, you know, the eradication of Indigenous Americans, westward expansion. That's not necessarily a story I want to read right before you go to bed, but it's a very important tale about American history, and we long not to include it. I wanted to make sure this information is there if or teacher or child to have a little bit more information about the topic. It was very thoughtfully, and I was really proud of it. So the thing as a nonfiction writer that you can use my trick, you use your afterword and cram all the information in there.
Nice. We have a few questions as well about kind of working or approaching an agent. I don't know if there's something that you kind of want to speak to. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the market. But if you could sum up the criteria an agent uses to choose picture books for the market, what would they be? I guess you can answer this maybe from an editorial point of view as well, if you'd prefer.
Really good question. Frustratingly, for sure, it's very hard to answer because every difference will have different tastes, different criteria, different their lists that work. The agents, just like as editor, they have their eye on the market, right? So looking to see what's selling, what library picture books looking, feeling like, so looking for something just as we are. So when I read a man and I a new idea to me, it's like I literally shake my arms around like it's so new. So that always very exciting. I think they're looking for a new take on a time on topic. So something like, say, time, brushing your teeth, going to school, ordinary worry about a child having to school jitters is probably not going to get a lot of it because that story many times. But is there like an angle that, I'm just bringing up, this might have already been, is the child who's nervous about school a dinosaur? And you have a dinosaur's point of view, what school might look like, made that up or might have all seen, misremembered it. I think that's what we're really fresh. I would say you want to answer this question yourself. I really should be very on the market is happening. If you want traditional publishing, you need to go to Barnes and Noble, the Amazon, bestseller, going to your independent seller, going to the library, seeing what contempt are being published, and sort of know where you get in the marketplace. Like understand kind of a picture book you're reading, what we call comp titles, what your competitive title is, what a book published in the last 4 or 5 years that's very similar. You really need to do that work. You're going to be pitching to agents because you know the genre they're trying to be working in.
Cool. And I think we'll do one more question to end on. Frances, excellent presentation. This is information I wish I'd known before I started self-publishing. What tips do you have for querying agents after editing?
Querying agents, well, you should certainly query agents before you edit. Agent is not to see something that hasn't really polished. So I would say, make sure that you're doing the research as to whether that you are submitting to is representing work that you want to do. I mean, all the information is on their websites. I'm sure Google children's agents, Reddit, some other very helpful site, a big long list out there, right? And then it's just a lot of hunting, and it's going to each site. It's looking at seeing what their submission guidelines are. They always make it very how they want you to submit, what kind of works they're looking for. If their books on their site that have published that you think are similar to yours in terms of like the publishing, you can certainly cite and say, I see that you publish Y and Z, so you should probably look at what I'm writing. And yeah, so I think it's just doing your research. I know it can be very long and very opaque and frustrating because you feel like you're sending work off into there. Another option is also there's a international organization called the SCBI, which is the Society of Children's Books and Illustrators. They have all over the world, certainly in the United States. They have conferences and webinars, and agents attend those conferences. And often, as a result of a conference, the agent will also herself open to some certain time. You can also get a sort of bend that agent's ear if you happen at a conference. So that's another way to make the process feel a little bit less mysterious.
All right, I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. I know that we had some issues with the sound. Hopefully you caught most of the information. And as I mentioned, the replay will be available for any of those who would like to rewatch it. And thank you so much, Frances, for a really great presentation, for sticking around to answer so many questions. I hope you all found that very useful. Yes, you can find Frances on the Reedsy Marketplace if you'd like to work with her on your children's picture book. She's available as an editor. Any last words to end on?
just, have fun with your picture book writing joy, not all. You with guidelines, not rules, sort of, just a mental foundation. And so, yeah, I look forward to working with you. Hopefully, find me on Reedsy. Thank you so much for me today.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.